All right, we're live. Namaste and welcome to the Bharatvaarta podcast. Thank you so much for tuning in. Uh, so, the government on Thursday released guidelines for regulating OTT streaming platforms and digital news media. Union Ministers Ravi Shankar Prasad ji and Prakash Javadekar ji said these are for, and to quote, empowering the ordinary users of social media. Discussing this with us today, we have Neha Joshi, who's a social activist and the national media co-in-charge of the Bharatiya Janata Yuva Morcha, which is one of the largest youth political organizations in India. Welcome, Neha ji. Good to have you on the podcast.
Thank you so much, Roshan ji.
We also have Aashish Chandorkar, who you've heard on plenty of episodes of Bharatvaarta. You heard him this morning on the weekly as well. He discusses politics, policy, and sometimes poha as well. He's an author, columnist, and a popular commentator on social media. Welcome, Aashish. Good to talk to you again.
Yeah, thanks, Gary. Good to be back.
All right, so I guess we can get started. Neha, I'll come to you first, and maybe you could summarize for us, what the government has proposed and what this means to people on social media and using OTT platforms as such.
Thank you, Roshan, and thank you, Bharatvaarta, for having me. Namaskar, Aashish, and to everyone who's listening to us today. First of all, apologies for the bad light. I'm on the road, so trying to work with what I have. Social media has empowered us ordinary citizens. It has, in the past decade or so, it's definitely given us a voice. It's also helped amplify a lot of voices which would otherwise not be heard. Even though that, this change has, these media.
Okay, did we lose? Sorry, I think the bandwidth is a little poor at your end. So we lost you there for the last 5 seconds. Go ahead, please.
Okay, sorry. But in the past few years, especially I think 2012, 13 onwards, we felt at some level that we were losing control. That's the sense that every social media user at some point of time has felt. I've spoken to tons of especially young users around me, because that's the population I primarily work with. And a lot of times we felt that, we were not in control of what we were looking at. We were not in control of, the information that we were consuming. It was getting harder and harder to distinguish between what was real information or news or facts and what is opinion. And if I go further, what was propaganda or hate speech or, just deliberate misinformation that was being, packaged in a way that it looks very real. It is very manipulative, and the impact of which can be, could be discrimination towards a particular community or person. It could be discrimination towards an entire country. It could be, in the case of United States, for example, we saw how the COVID response of the government, that was, the public health response was inhibited by the kind of propaganda that a certain section of people in the United States launched. So the whole anti-mask lobby, we saw these voices amplified. The treatments were questioned, the treatment protocols were put into question, the vaccine was put into question. So, it's a very dangerous trend that we've seen in the past few years. And the question of regulating social media in a certain way, it's come up if I talk only of India, it's come up in parliamentary panels. The questions have been raised by parties across, by MPs across parties. It's come up in the committees. It's come up in public discourse. So it has long been discussed, and India is not the only country who's thinking about it. I was, as I was preparing for this, I was just looking at, what's happening globally. And the EU Digital Services Bill that was introduced earlier this year, it talks about regulating social media. And some of the, ways in which they propose to regulate social media within EU may sound very, very restrictive to some of the people sitting in India. Germany has the Network Enforcement Act, and we saw what happened in Uganda, where the Ugandan president, came on TV and he said that there is clear manipulation happening. Certain voices are being amplified, by others are being completely blanked out. So when information is power, we cannot give certain technological giants the monopoly to control this information. I mean, just to give you an analogy, there was a time when newspapers were the ultimate custodians of information. So अगर सुबह के अखबार में कोई information नहीं छपी, तो मतलब वो चीज हुई भी नहीं. आशीष जी, am I right when I say that? So a lot of times people would be like, ये हुआ ही नहीं क्योंकि छपा नहीं.
Absolutely.
So same way, I think today, where social media democratized that for us, and newspapers no longer could control that narrative. However, we've now gone to the extent where these intermediaries are no more intermediaries. Actually, they've become publishers. So at that point, we do need to safeguard, and especially when the impact is things like inhibiting public health response to a pandemic. That's dangerous. When the impact is violence, as we saw on the 26th of January, there is. I don't think anybody is trying to control anybody's right to free speech, but what the government is trying to protect here is you being manipulated by these social media intermediaries, because none of them are neutral. That, I think, is something that is very clear, the way, especially what we saw in the aftermath of the Capitol Hill violence, the way Donald Trump's account was indefinitely suspended and banned. We saw that these platforms are definitely not neutral. So free speech is not their agenda. So when free speech is not their agenda, I think it is important that the rule of law, takes precedence, and every country enacts a certain law so that the constitution of the country that remains supreme to these social media companies also. So what if you look at the provision that have been introduced by these guidelines, they actually empower the users. So the end user now can decide what or can actually rely more on what they're seeing. They can, if they're banned, or if a certain information is labeled as fake news, which we saw what's happening for people of a certain ideology more than others, they can question that. There is a redressal mechanism. So this actually empowers the end user like they've never been empowered. So I think how I see these guidelines are extremely progressive. And I think the fact that, the typical, the pseudo-liberal lobby, as I like to call them, that they haven't been able to raise a hue and cry, or at least not been able to point out one particular point where this was going to curb freedom of expression, something that they love to cry about. I think that says in itself that it is extremely progressive, and it is something that was required and in fact long overdue.
Right. Yeah. Thank you so much for those opening comments. Aashish, would you like to add to that, maybe talk about a few specifics in the 30-page report that was released? And also, as Neha ji mentioned, some of the background relating to what has happened before as well. Over to you, Aashish.
Yeah, no, I think that was a very good context setting as to why we are here. This has obviously not happened out of the blue. There's a full background to why these rules have been enacted the way they've been enacted, right? See, there are two parts to this carry. One is that there are rules around the social media platforms, which will be administered by the Ministry of Electronics and IT, or MeitY. So here the idea is that you divide the platforms into two parts, significant ones and non-significant ones. There'll be a threshold of users where the platform will be called significant, let's say 50 lakhs, or I guess a number will come out soon. There was rumor that they'll say, like 50 lakh users, but I don't think that's yet been put in the rules. But there'll be two types of platforms. So the more the users in India, the greater the responsibility of the platforms. That's let's say the broad thumb rule. These platforms will have to follow some kind of a due diligence of what they are doing, how they're operating. they will have to create a grievance redressal mechanism, and that has to be like a multi-level mechanism, right? So there has to be like a hierarchy of a chief compliance officer, a resident grievance officer. There has to be a nodal person, which is like a government contact 24/7. So in case government wants to, question something, or they need some information or something, uh, uh, let's say something against the sovereignty of the nation is going on, information is needed, they can ask the nodal officer for that information. And these platforms will also create a monthly compliance report of how many people they have banned, what they have been banned for, how many complaints were made, what did they do with the complaints, and all of that. So that those proposals have been put in place for the social media intermediaries. Now there are specific guidelines around ensuring online safety and dignity of users, especially women, and specific guidelines around how posts related to nudity or depiction of derogatory depiction of individuals have to be taken down based on certain guidelines. And also there is a window which has been given like 15 days in which you have to resolve the user complaints, right? So when, let's say, if my account gets suspended on a platform, the and I complain to the platform that I don't agree with the suspension, they have to get back to me in 15 days time. Today the challenge is that a lot of the suspension process is just arbitrary. It could be genuine. I'm not saying that there may not be a good reason for someone for a platform to suspend a user, but the user still needs to know what exactly transpired there, right? So that transparency is not there today, and that will be filled in. So this is on the social media part, right? Which is what we typically. There are some other things also, like you can get voluntarily verified, you can give your government ID and all of that. So there are some specific things also which will come in. But there's a second part to it, which is meant for digital media and the OTT platforms. And these rules will be governed by the Ministry of Information and Broadcasting. So why is that? Because all the press related things, or all the, let's say, the visual media like movies or TV serials, etc., are already governed by the INB ministry, right? So the second part will be meant more for the INB ministry, where the idea is that the regulations are light touch. They are more self-regulatory type regulations. So essentially, if a print media is following a code of ethics, like they do with respect to the editors guild being there, or some kind of a self-regulation, the same self-regulation has to apply to the digital part of the platform. So let's take an example. Let's say I'm a newspaper. Now today, as part of the newspaper, I'm part of Press Council of India, Editors Guild. There are different self-regulatory mechanisms in my city, in my state, at national level. But if I have a website, that's not regulated in any way. I can put anything on the website. Anything in the sense with the risk I want to take about the information. So that's not controlled. So the let's say the Press Council or the other self-regulatory bodies today do not actually have any control over what's on the online channels. So that will also come under the purview. Similarly, the OTT platforms, which are now, putting out content any which way, like serials or movies, so they will be regulated exactly the way the movies are regulated or the content is regulated. So there'll be a censor, not censor, but there'll be like a rating system where you have to give a 4-level rating of the content being appropriate for kids, for 13 plus, for 16 plus, and for adults. There has to be parental lock built in the apps, which I think is a very fair ask, because once the kids are on internet, they don't know what content they are being exposed to. So I think this, I don't think anyone should really have any issues with that. And of course, the fact that you cannot mismarket it, right? So we have OTT shows full of swear words, for example, right? So then you can have them, but then that has to be adult content. You cannot really market it as a 13 plus or 16 plus type of a content, right? Again, there's a self-regulation by the publishers. There's a self-regulation at the level of the self-regulatory bodies themselves. So the self-regulatory bodies also have to register themselves and act in a prudent way. And there has to be an oversight mechanism. So again, this is exactly what happens today for in relation to the Press Council or for other TV and visual media. The confusion, and I guess we can discuss this in more detail. I think one of the objections which the media has raised it that. There was an article today in Economic Times, if you see this morning, which claimed that the government is asking the digital media. So there are like 3 parts, right? Social media, digital media, and which is like news, and OTT, which is clearly they are publishers, right? So they are not intermediaries. So there was a confusion for digital news outlets where they say that they are going to be treated as intermediaries. My understanding is that is not the case. They are clubbed with the second set, which is the publisher set, and not with the intermediary set, but we can discuss that.
Right. So we have a couple of questions coming in on YouTube. Right. So Srivatsa Subana says, considering that the impact of what is published on social media is immediate, isn't 36 hours too long a time period for removing the content? Aashish, you want to take this?
So it's reduced to 24 hours now. The challenge carries that those of us who live in social media, for us, even 34 minutes or 24 minutes will also be too late, right? The problem is that the governments will have to follow a process, and 24 hours actually may be fairly quick with respect to how the processes are designed in the government, right? Because you're talking about a 24/7 operations. Even the government request going in at that speed will be quite an achievement.
Right.
Also, if I may add, to that the idea is that slowly these platforms will also evolve, and we will see less and less of such content. That's the whole idea behind this exercise. That because from absolutely no onus to you going to a point where there's also penal provisions now. So I think the idea is that there's going to be that behavior change that's going to happen, even in terms of how the algorithms of these companies work, because these algorithms are driven by very clear engineering decisions which people back there are making. So those algorithms will also have to change, according to some of these regulations. So the idea is that the incidents also reduce over time.
That's
right. Yeah, it's a fair point. So Neha ji, social media platforms, whenever we talk about any kind of regulation, the argument of freedom of speech is used not to comply with these, right? And this is sort of a universal excuse in most places that we've seen. What do you make of that as such?
So first of all, the government, even if you read the guidelines, at the outset it states that the idea is not to control what you're thinking or what you're saying. In fact, you're free to say what you want within the confines of hate speech, right? The freedom of expression, as enshrined in the Constitution, has never been absolute. In fact, the government is mandated to act against you if what you're saying or expressing on social media or otherwise, somehow threatens the sovereignty of the nation or threatens somebody else's safety, security, or your own safety, security, in fact. So to say that freedom of expression is absolute, that in itself is a flawed logic. Now, if you're saying that you're entitled to be manipulated, is that the premise that people are saying? People are giving, reading some of the articles that were trying to critique this, it actually seemed like the premise that people were making was that people should have a lawful right to be manipulated and deceived. Why do we have fraud laws, laws against fraud and undue influence? There's a reason. There are very tangible harms that are coming out from being manipulated. The whole propaganda against India manufactured vaccines. We saw how that played out, and how the government had to really come out, the companies had to come out and offer explanations and boost the confidence of people. So I think the understanding of freedom of expression, I think that has to, this whole narrative that any kind of regulation is going to curb freedom of expression, United States, EU, we constantly look at the West. The West is already regulating a lot more than we were. We are the largest user base for most of these tech giants. And the least of regulations existed here. So we're the biggest market, these companies are generating a large amount of revenue. And there is no incentive for these companies to regulate hateful speech or violent speech. Because, there was this famous study by Deb Roy and his colleagues from MIT, which said that hate speech or fake news travels much more faster and gets much more engagement than actual news does. So that's the kind of impact that you're fighting here. So because they have no incentive to counter this, because the social media companies are actually making money out of this engagement, it is imperative that the government steps in and puts in certain regulations which make sure that the constitution of the country is something that they operate in the framework of. So I think my message to everybody who brings in freedom of expressionist speech is that, just go on some of these platforms, and when people call for violence, and when people post videos that that are full of semi-pornographic content, is that the kind of freedom of speech that we're talking about, when we wouldn't watch it on TV, when we wouldn't want to hear such stuff on the radio? Why would we want it on our social media platforms? I think that's a question that constantly needs to be put out to these people.
Hey, Karen, just to add, I think that's a very good point as to the platform equivalence, right? So the freedom of expression cannot really vary by what platform you're using. The freedom of speech is essentially it's kind of subordinate to the laws of the country. Now, you can argue that should India have more free laws? I mean, that's a different argument altogether.
That's a different argument, yes.
I mean, if you have a much broader set of FOE laws, then it will apply to all platforms. But the platform doesn't get to decide what is FOE for me. The FOE belongs to the country, and the definition belongs to the constitution, and it belongs to the country. And whatever the definition be, even if you don't like the definition, cannot be superseded by an individual platform, right? Now, the thing is that FOE, by the way, is also varies drastically by different countries. US, because they've all got these first 3-4 amendments which give different kinds of, I mean, they are like fundamental part of their constitution, and they give a lot of freedom of people to talk, to disrespect things, to be, to call out things, and so on, right? That's a different culture, and it's a different setup. It's been guaranteed, enshrined in their constitution. In India, the FOE was limited by the very first amendment. By the way, interesting anecdote there is that the first amendment to Indian constitution happened before the parliamentary election. So it was done by a government on a discretionary basis. It was not even an elected government, right? The first amendment happened in 1951, while the first election happened in 1952. So the first Indian government had already curbed freedom of speech on a discretionary basis without taking any, without taking it to the public as a part of a voting decision, etc. Right? Now, whatever is there in the constitution in 1951, that is what the base is for FOE in India. For that has to be kind of respected. You may like it, you may not like it. You can argue for saying that the constitution should be changed, which is a different call altogether. We have rules like 153, 295A. Again, you and I may not like those rules, but they exist, right? And when they exist, the governments will use those rules. Now, also the other part is that the FOE is always government versus an individual. The FOE doesn't apply between me and you. For example, if I call you names, you are, like as Neha ji pointed out, you are free to sue me as per the laws of the country, right? I mean, you are not. My freedom of speech doesn't mean that you are liable to listen to nonsense that I talk, right? You have a reputation to protect, and you can protect that reputation through constitutional or legal means. So again, the FOE is not between two individuals. FOE is something which the government guarantees and guarantees in the structure of the constitution of their day, or the laws of their day. And I think that is where the main problem is, that these platforms, especially Twitter, more than any other platform, they've been trying to use an arbitrary yardstick of FOE, which is also biased, by the way. I mean, but let's not even go there, because it's the bias is a one-way bias, and we are aware of that. Neha ji already pointed it out. But even forget the bias aside, we keep the bias aside. The problem is that Twitter doesn't get to define what is FOE in India. And I think that's what the rules are trying to enforce.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I guess it's more of a fundamental question. And, we see that with some of the comments and questions that are coming in. So Abhishek Paul says, what speech is not okay to be at the discretion of the central government and power only? Do you expect state governments also to jump in? And this basically becomes another forum for targeting political opponents. Neha ji, you want to take this?
Oh, okay. So if I understand the question correctly, they're saying that this is going to be used by not just the central government, but also the state government to sort of censor content. Is that what?
Yeah, censor maybe political opponents and so on.
Okay, how do I answer this? So these are not. What the government is trying to do here is reduce the arbitrariness. So it's not like action wasn't being taken by these platforms. We saw, we saw how Twitter introduced this this sort of a mark that would come saying that this hasn't been fact checked, or the content is dubious or something. Similarly, I remember in the run up to the 2019 election, Facebook removed around 700 pages 657 of which were affiliated to the Congress party, and about 15 were allegedly affiliated to the Congress party, and 15 were allegedly affiliated to BJP. So there was a certain censorship that was happening, but clearly that wasn't enough. So now we have a clear set of guidelines outlining what constitutes hate speech. It actually, I think, will curb some of this arbitrariness where we saw people being, I still remember in West Bengal, again, this was pre-2019 election, a girl was, arrested for simply sharing a meme on the chief minister. And there are several such incidents that are pointed, that occur around the country. And there's outrage around one person, while the whole premise of regulation on what is what constitutes hate speech or targeting of an individual, those lines were blurred. Now we have a mechanism where an individual who is being targeted can go for addressal. And if you feel that something is not right, you can approach this social media platform, and they have a mechanism in place which has been decided in consultation with the government. So I think this is going to actually reduce some of this arbitrariness. But again, I don't completely diss the fear that this a person has raised here. But I feel that these guidelines are also going to, these are also going to evolve, because this is the first time that the government has actually come up with like a comprehensive set of guidelines for these tech giants. So my view is that as we go forward, and as the understanding of the government of how these platforms work, because there's also more transparency that they have to display now. So as this understanding grows, there's also going to be the guidelines are also going to evolve. So we can only hope. And I think being a part of the BJP, I do know that my leadership is committed to transparency. The idea, we've seen what names our prime minister has been called all of these years, and the kind of targeting that some of us have handled on social media. So I think free speech is something that we all want to stand for, and the government wants to stand for. But what is in the interest of nation, that has to come first.
Right. So Aashish, we have another specific question, right? So as you mentioned earlier, these rules bundle the digital news outlets with OTT platforms. Now, is this restrictive, and is there an argument to be made that it will compromise media freedom as such?
Yes, I think that government should come out and specifically address that one. I think it's not a good thing to club media platforms with OTT. As intermediaries, right? So for example, in this definition, if the doubt which was raised in today's Economic Times article is correct, then even Bharatvaarta becomes an intermediary. But we know that it's not it's a publisher, it's not an intermediary, right? To the extent that people can post on our YouTube channel, but that doesn't oblige us to take those questions, right? So we are not really endorsing those questions. So as such, I think that part needs to be clarified definitely by the government. I don't think it is right to label news platforms. Even again, it's not about what slant those platforms have. They could be right, left, center, doesn't matter, right? The fact that these rules are going to stay for the conceivable future. Governments come and go, but the rules stay, right? So the rules should not be interpreted in the way of what benefits the government of the day or a particular government. The point is that the news outlets should have freedom to report. What falls in the domain of libel, etc., is anyway being tackled in terms of legal mechanism, and those mechanisms will also get powerful and strengthened. But I think there's a distinction to be made between social media intermediaries, publishers, which are of two types: OTT platform and news outlets. And I think the news outlets cannot be called intermediaries. That is a point which government should, in my view, come out and clarify very, very specifically. Otherwise, what will happen is that, like I said, as Abhishek said, and as Neha ji also said, that basically, people will then start using it as a place to settle scores, right? There's a news which comes out, and the next person complains to the regulatory body, and a lot of time is being wasted and just back and forth on the articles.
Yeah.
Government will say, okay, take down the. By the way, there's a provision that the request to take down the content can only be made by the secretary in the MeitY or the INB ministry. So even if it's a state government, my understanding is that they have to go by the central government to ask for. They can't unilaterally ask Like Twitter will not have to deal with 28 state governments and 8 union territories. It has to go via the ministry. But even otherwise, I think this distinction has to be made very clear so that there's no provision of misuse and like hurting the genuine news platforms or discussion platforms.
Right. So Nehaji, there's an other argument that all of this will impose a huge cost on compliance, right, for social media and OTT platforms. And now they may be like, fledgling startups and new platforms that might have to incur this cost, right? So what do you make of that?
So first of all, I think that's why the government has introduced this distinction between significant social media platforms. So I think the compliances are more, there's a certain threshold. The government is yet to define that threshold, which will be in terms of the number of users that platform has. So I think that's to protect the interests of these startups, and I think which are mostly indigenous companies, which are only coming up now, and they're pitted against these large monopolistic tech giants. So I think that safeguards. Now, if we're making an argument that these platforms will have to incur a huge cost, I was just looking at some of the figures. So India's digital advertising industry is worth over 160 billion INR, and it's estimated to reach 560 billion by 2023. So there's a lot of revenue that these companies are generating by using, selling, manipulating your data. We're the products here. I think that has to be, that understanding. We've watched some of these documentaries and which have tried to explain how we perceive these platforms as free because we are the products actually here. So I think that understanding is still evolving when it comes to our country, which is actually the in terms of user base. WhatsApp, we're the largest user base. I think Facebook, we're the second largest or something. So these companies are making enough money by literally selling us as data points. So I think if certain safeguards have to be introduced, so be it.
Yeah, Kylie, I mean, I see this as cost of doing business, right? I mean, as Neha ji said, these people are making money in India. So if they're to put a 10 people team to make money, I mean, that's the structure of the business. It's like saying that a manufacturing plant has to put in a set of compliance rules because they have to comply with the safety regulations, the environmental regulations, labor laws. Yeah, I mean that's what it is. So, and of course it's also well defined, right? So it's not that these laws are arbitrary. The hierarchy of what is needed for compliance has been defined. There are 3-4 level of compliances, or let's say the grievance redressal mechanism has multi-level hierarchy. So as such, every platform knows upfront. Of course, depending on their user base, they may have to look at how many people they need as per the the number of complaints which they expect. But I mean, going back to Nehaji's old point, then there's also the incentive of automating it by making the algorithms better, right? So there's also this. Yeah. I mean, if you don't want to incur the cost of compliance, you can always use technology in a less biased way to kind of and kind of more well-defined definition as per the law of the land to ensure that the fewer complaints reach you. It's I mean, on a frivolous and a flippant note, it's also employment creation carry, right? So I mean, each of those significant platforms will have, India will have 300-400 extra employees because of these regulations.
Oh, absolutely. Right. That's a great point. That's something that I didn't think of. But I just want to add a little bit here. So I came across this speech that UK Information Commissioner Elizabeth Denham made. And, he said that there's a growing mistrust of social media and online services. People want to use these services. They appreciate the value of them, but they're increasingly questioning how much control they have of what they see and how their information is used. Something that this was my intent of, what I was saying in my opening comments. So, and he went on to say that relationship needs repairing and regulation can help that. I think that's a very powerful thing. And I particularly like that line, that there's also this growing mistrust, because, when I read something on Facebook, I don't trust it anymore. I try to at least verify it, from 3 different sources. But that's not a practice that everybody's following clearly. And that's why we saw that, fake news is a phenomenon. So I think this is also a chance for these companies to make their customers trust them more. So, if you look at the positive side of it, their business might even get better because they may be able to better target people if they look at it as positive and they better their algorithms, like Ashish ji was saying.
Right. Ashish, also, I mean, could you comment on this divide of social media platforms in terms of significant and not significant, as Neha ji mentioned earlier? And, what is the rationale for this?
Yeah, so currently it seems actually in the note which came out, the press note which came out, the government actually named the platforms and some of the user base which they were carrying, right? So they talked about WhatsApp, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. So we have apparently got 53 crore WhatsApp users. There are 45 on YouTube, 41 on Facebook, 21 crore on Instagram, and just 2 crores on Twitter, which I think is on the underestimated. I think Twitter should be at least 4 to 5 CR, but nonetheless, that's the figure which was in the note. It also shows, by the way, I mean, on a different track, I mean, it shows like the power of digital India, right? Like when you talk about having 53 crore people on WhatsApp, or it means, of course, same person can have multiple phones and multiple WhatsApp numbers, but that's a different thing. But let's say even if there are 30 crore people on WhatsApp, that's a huge, humongous number, right? And pretty much all of that has been achieved in the last 4-5 years as the data has become cheap. But yeah, I mean, with great power and great reach comes great responsibility also. So I think in that sense, the government is trying to create that distinction that if you have more number of users, basically users is a proxy for your size of business, your commercial interest, your influence. My only submission here would be that I think the number of users should not be the only criteria to define this, because I think the real influence is also critical. And all of us are Twitter GVs that way, right? So I think I think we'll all agree that Twitter wields a lot of influence, because not because it has got many users, but it has because of the real-time nature of the platform, right? No other platform, I mean, perhaps Instagram stories, yes, but no other platform is as real-time as Twitter is in terms of open and real time. I mean, WhatsApp is not open; it's like closed groups. I mean, plus there are limitations on how many people you can reach and so on. But Twitter is completely open and it's fast moving. So even if it's got 2 crore or 5 crore users in India, the fact is that it actually drives a lot of discourse, especially on critical days like Jan 26 that we were discussing. So on those days, Twitter becomes much more important. So I really hope that the government takes into account the influence, a second order effect, that news is actually originating on Twitter, then it is reaching Facebook or Instagram or YouTube or other places, right? So I think that to me is quite critical. Again, I mean, quite likely 3 of the platforms will belong to Facebook. So this is actually a Facebook question: how will they have the same teams for a redressal across 3 platforms, or will they look at it differently? So we're talking about 3 companies here: Facebook, Google, and Twitter. That's what the government will have to deal with, right? In terms of the regulations. So as such, it doesn't sound very onerous. I think the logic is quite sound that the larger you are, the more responsibility you should carry. And the fact that more influential you are, hopefully that fact will also be taken into account when the actual definition is drafted. Carry on mute.
Okay, that's a first. Please keep your questions and comments coming in. We have plenty of other things to talk about. So Neha, I mean, I don't know if it's the calm before the storm, but there hasn't been too much of noise against this. I mean, I was researching before getting on this podcast, and apart from the usual couple of op-eds, people haven't really raged about it. Is this some sign of consensus, or what do you make of it?
Well, I think it just shows how deliberate and how thorough the government has been in doing its job. This hasn't suddenly come up. The Supreme Court has actually asked the government to look into this. There have been parliamentary committees discussing this to no end. There have been various cases not too far back where people have been targeted for their social media usage. And when I say targeted, I'm not just saying legally, but also this whole media trial that we see people subjected to. So I think what it's a sign of is that we are maturing as a democracy, and when something good happens, maybe we're learning to appreciate it. I think that's what I would take it as a sign of. And the guidelines are fairly comprehensive and very progressive, like I said. So, but again, like I said, nothing's perfect. I think these will also evolve as these platforms increase transparency, the government is also going to learn how to regulate better without actually controlling the information. So there's a difference between the two, and I think the government is very clear that it wants to regulate in terms of uh, what is what falls within the boundaries of the constitution, but it doesn't want to curb anybody's expression or free speech.
Right. So Ashish, a question about how this will impact Indian platforms like Koo and ShareChat and plenty of others. Anything specifically related to that?
See, the Indian platforms have always come out and said that they will, follow the law of the land. I mean, that's been their promise and their premise. I don't think, first of all, I don't think there should be any distinction at a government level for rules for platforms which are Indian and non-Indian, right? When you're operating in India, the business operating environment should be a level playing field. So that I think that should be the premise. But that in this particular instance, normally what happens is that the argument is that Indian companies get leeway or advantage, or they have the advantage of incumbency or knowing the system better. In this case, the problem is reversed, right? In this case, Indian companies are at a disadvantage structurally, while the foreign companies are trying to bypass the Indian rules and regulations. That's the general premise of the problem. So in that sense, the toning down here has to happen for the foreign companies, not for the Indian companies. I just hope that, ShareChat also, it's got a Twitter linkage now. So Koo's, of course, very new and very independent, but also Koo has apparently got 3 million users. So, I mean, if Twitter is significant at 2 million users, 30 lakh users basically, right? So, I mean, it's going quite fast. So, Twitter can be significant at 2 crore users. Koo will catch up with that very, very soon, right? So, we might actually have a significant Indian platform too. So as such, the laws should apply exactly the same way. What is not acceptable on Koo should not be acceptable on Twitter, should not be acceptable on TV or in print, right? I mean, it should be like one comprehensive view of what India thinks. I mean, Indian laws think are acceptable or not. So I don't see any great advantage or disadvantage here. The only issue, of course, is that the Indian platforms have to catch up in terms of the number of users. So they have to transition from this not significant to the significant category. And once they transition, then of course it's the onus of compliance or the burden of compliance kind of equalizes. And at that point, it should not really matter what is your origin as such.
Right. So Nehaji, we've talked about why these guidelines and laws were necessitated in the first place, right? What does it signal for the future in terms of intervention and regulation on digital media as such?
Okay, can you reframe the question? Sorry, I don't think I understood that correctly. Could you just reframe that question?
The impact of this regulation going forward, I mean, how do you see this? I mean, do you think that there would be more guidelines issued? Do you think that platforms will change their approach in any particular way going forward? What do you think will come out of this going forward?
Okay, so I think I'm going to first of all not look at it in isolation. So this call for regulating of social media, this is not just limited to India, right? We see that countries around the world, there has been an understanding that at some point we will need to regulate these giants, because these are, the whole idea of technological colonialism. That discussion was already happening. We see that these platforms are no longer publisher. They were actually controlling the information that you and I were consuming on a daily basis. They were amplifying certain voices at the cost of others. They could manipulate elections. We all saw The Great Hack. We watched The Great Hack and how Cambridge Analytica, it has manipulated elections across the world. We know that certain Indian political parties were also their clients. So I think this whole understanding that social media at some point will need to be regulated it's global. So first of all, it's not unique to India. What it does signal is that when our introduction to social media, we've matured as users. I think we thought we were empowered. There was this vulnerability that we did not understand. I think we understand it better. The government understands it better, and the idea that the sovereignty of the country and the constitution of the country comes above some of these. Sorry. Hello. Sorry, my network. So the idea that the constitution of the country has to be upheld uh, at any cost, we're not understanding that, and we're 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 more open to it. I think that's also something that I like you said, in before coming to this session, I was also trying to research about what are people actually critiquing. It's what questions do people have, and I found that the one question that did come up was this distinction between OTT and digital media platforms. But apart from that, there wasn't much substantial that people could say or think in terms of critiquing the regulations. So what I see going forward is that as users, we will be more mature. As platforms, there's these platforms will realize that business is important, but what is more important is to follow the rules, to not play on people's vulnerabilities. So the rules are going to evolve. The idea of hate speech is going to evolve. The definition of what is kosher and what is not kosher is going to evolve. And I feel that trusting the government of the day, and also the general understanding of law within the country, I think we are going to get in a better place where we constantly don't have to be scared of how the information that is being consumed by our parents and also our kids. We don't have to constantly be in fear of what they're consuming, because there is a regulatory mechanism in place and there are various checks and balances there.
Right. So Aashish, we have a question coming in on YouTube. So Anant asks, the issue of WhatsApp, Telegram and other messaging apps being required to identify first originators will break their E2E encryption. How problematic would that be?
I think this is one of the problematic rules, Carrie. I actually don't think government should ask the platforms to break the encryption rules. And it doesn't matter whether it's a BJP government or a Congress government or a third front government, right? It's not about who's in power. The fact is that, so let's take a real world analogy. Let's say a Telegram, a WhatsApp group can have say 2 to 6 people. A Telegram group can have say, I don't know how many, 1,000 people maybe. That's some higher limit, right? Let's say I call a meeting of 1,000 people in a community hall. And in that hall, I say something which is not as per the laws of the land. Unless the people sitting inside complain about me, there's no way for the government or anyone outside to know what I said, right? So it's the same kind of a logic to be applied to the groups on WhatsApp or Telegram also.
Aashish, that still doesn't make it right?
No, of course, but there are other ways to kind of catch it, right? And the challenge, Neha ji, is that if you break encryption, then it can genuinely be misused by anyone and at lower levels, right? See, one thing is that these laws are being enforced at the level of the secretary of the two ministries, which are practically the highest level of bureaucracy in India. I mean,
right.
So the moment you break encryption, then it goes into the realm of people ask. I mean, different people will have access to that information, and we already see WhatsApp chats being leaked of this journalist, that journalist, some film star. I mean, that's not really correct. It doesn't matter who's doing it and who's the victim here, right? Whether it is journalist A or B or film star A or B. I mean, leaking WhatsApp chat, which by the way are not leaking by encryption leak, it's just because they synced it to a Google Drive or Apple or a Google Drive, and that's where it's coming from. But I think it will give rise to a lot of non-contextual mudslinging and personal victimization. Plus, the government will generally then have a way to kind of control private citizens and threaten them. So yes, I mean, I don't know what the solution here is, but I actually don't think the messaging encryption should be broken if they are already coded that way. If there are messaging platforms where there is no encryption, like Facebook Messenger has got a lower degree of encryption, or Twitter DMs where there's no encryption at all, that's fine. I mean, that could be under the purview of the general rules. But I think the government should not ask for first originators based on cracking of encryption, because that would give governments a very wide power to kind of create chaos in the country. And that doesn't matter. I mean, I can trust government A, you can trust government B, but the point is neither A nor B should have the power to really persecute the citizens in general.
Right. So Aashish, I'm going to come to you for some closing remarks. We've discussed social media regulation on plenty of weeklies that I remember and plenty of episodes as well, right? And we're seeing the government finally step up and be proactive on these reforms. Neha ji has mentioned how the social media user itself has evolved and has become more mature, right? So yeah, closing thoughts from you on how all of this is shaping up.
Yeah, I think the basic premise is quite simple. If you're a news outlet, news opinion outlet, you should have the same regulation as what you would be if you were a print outlet or a TV outlet, right? So because you are in a category which does something, and the rules across categories should be the same. Doesn't matter whether you are digital or physical or print or whatever it is. Similarly, if you are producing movies, documentaries, serials, short films, all that is being regulated in a certain way by in the context of the old style movies and documentaries, so that regulation should be the same. The question is for social media, which is a new animal and doesn't really have an equivalence in the physical world. I think that's where these rules, as Neha ji already said, will be quite effective. And I don't think they're onerous as such. I mean, from a social media perspective, I don't think these rules are onerous at all. These are fairly logical rules. All the government is saying is that you have to just comply to the law of the land. So I think the overall direction is correct. These rules will evolve as we discussed. Probably there could be some give and take here and there. Some things will have to be dropped. Something may get added over the next couple of years. But I think overall, as Neha ji pointed out, this is a question of being digitally sovereign. And I think every country, not just India, should have the right to protect its technology sovereignty, digital sovereignty, information sovereignty in the context of the law of the land, which could differ country to country. So what the US is doing or what a Uganda is doing, what the Poland is doing is actually not, I mean, we don't need to copy any of them. The fact that they are doing something is what the main thing here is, that every country has a right to do what they think, what works in their jurisdiction.
All right. On that note, we come to the end of the podcast. Thank you so much, Neha ji, for joining us. Hopefully, we'll talk to you again on future podcasts. Thank you, Aashish, again for joining us the second time in a day. Right. Thank you all for tuning in. Until next time, stay safe, take care, and Jai Hind.
Thank you.
Thank you.